Flood, part 4, I think this is, if I remember right. So if you look at the murder of Abel by Cain, he gives us his motivation. He entered the secret combination so that he could murder to get gain. And when he kills Abel, he says, that I'm free now and I have my brother's flocks. So like he's doing what the Gideon robbers do in the Book of Mormon, murder to get gain, like use violence to get what they want. And then that escalates, like Lamech, his great-grandson or great-great-grandson or something, or great-great-great-grandson, is even worse. He kills his great-grandfather, Erod, because Erod discovered that he had entered the secret combination, and was like telling people about it, and so then Lamech kills him, and so he doesn't kill. Book of Moses points this out. He doesn't kill to get gain. He kills for the sake of the oath, which is even worse. And then as Enoch comes on the scene in the Book of Moses, it talks about how this violence started to spread, these secret works of darkness started to spread, and basically how the earth became full of violence, right? So when it comes to proportionality, that's one thing. I mentioned yesterday, the punishment shows that God's, the flood is rooted in God's love, in a sense, because it's his justice, and his justice is, moral. He's protecting innocent victims, whereas the gods of Babylon had a flood because they just didn't like the noise. And proportionality, they're still like, well, how it seems disproportionate. And one thing is, well, the earth was filled with violence. You got all just people killing each other to take what they want, seeking for power. That's another phrase that's used in the Book of Moses. They're seeking for power. It's just, anyway. So, and they've started to build complex cities where there's like this oppression and everything, and it's juxtaposed. The foil, like the city of Enoch, the son of Cain, is a foil to the city of Enoch, the son of Jared, Zion, and there is to be a compare and contrast, right? Like one is the seed of the woman, and the other one's the seed of the serpent. And anyway, so that's going on. Then another thing to think about is hyperbole. So I was telling you got to look at like the literary structure and everything. So one of the things to look at is like hyperbole. So it's not clear, that what the story is getting at. Is it talking about all the earth, or is it talking about some of the earth? Is it talking about every human being, or some? It's not clear, because, and I'll just cut that. I don't want to get into too much depth on that. Just to say, like, we make too big of a deal, I think, out of that issue when we approach this story, because it's not really clear. And I do think it's trying to say the whole earth is being returned to the waters of chaos. But see, that in itself gets into the realm of symbolism. And so did they mean that, like, literally, that the whole earth returned to chaos? Or are they just trying to say that this is what happens when you live this way? Everything returns to chaos. Like, so, and I tend to lean towards that latter point. And it's because of all the studies I've done on waters of chaos and the creation story. And in fact, that's just get into that a little bit. The word for flood is like a special word that's used to describe the waters above the earth, above the firmament. And so it's like this, the earth is being returned, it's collapsing. The firmament, like the earth is basically basically an arc, or a Jaredite barge. If you watched any of my creation fireside, the way the earth is created is it looks like an arc, or a Jaredite barge in the middle of a cosmic ocean. And so what's happening is the earth is no longer going to like support all the weight of sin. Like basically the violence is turning Noah. I gotta back up a little bit. When Noah is born, his father, Lamech, by the way, again, like there's a bad Lamech who's like worse than Cain, and then there's Lamech, Noah's father. See, there's like this juxtaposition, this foil between the two lines, the two genealogies. Anyway, so Lamech names his son Noah because Noah's name in Hebrew means comfort or rest. And so because this Noah that's born, the prophecy is that he will bring comfort or rest to the earth, because at that point in time the land was filled with famine. And so what you can think of it as is that, remember, there are two things that indicate that everything's working right in the Genesis story, and it's the land produces after its own kind, and animals and humans produce after their own kind. Like, the earth is generative, it's creative, it's it's like, because the Spirit of God is breathed into everything and it's saturated with God's presence, it works right. And as the violence of the earth increases and starts to fill the earth with violence, then also the earth starts to be like, the Spirit starts to like dry out, you could say. It's no longer saturated with the Spirit or the presence of God. In fact, multiple times it talks about how the seed of Cain were shut out from the presence of God in the book of Moses. So like, as the wickedness increases, the earth dries out of the Spirit and becomes, and produces famine. It no longer works right. It no longer produces fruit after its own kind. And so Noah is going to bring peace or comfort to the land. Like, he's going to restore it to its proper order. And again, this in General Conference, Elder Christofferson pointed out that in the Book of Mormon, where it says that if you prosper in the land, if you keep my commandments, you'll prosper in the land. And if you don't keep my commandments, you'll be cut off from God's presence. And that's a Hebrew parallelism that kind of shows you what they mean by prosper in the land. It means having God's presence. It's not necessarily about like material wealth, although material wealth often comes with keeping your covenants, because you just get blessed, and it's just happens. But it doesn't have to be that. Like, it's just being drenched with the Spirit, having the Spirit of God fill the land. And so that's what's happening, is there's a reversal of creation, basically. Like, God's breath went out into the land, and now, because of wickedness, corruption, and violence is like pushing it back out, and God's breath is turning from life-giving into punishment. And that's another thing I wanted to point out is, in the Hebrew Bible, often God's anger is expressed in the Hebrew as hot breath coming out of his nostrils. Like when somebody gets mad, they kind of like breathe out of their nostrils, and like fire or something. And that's what a common idiomatic expression in the Bible about God's anger is, that it's like hot breath coming out of his nostrils. So it's like, again, it's the breath of God, but in one instance it's life-giving, and in the other instance it's destructive. And the only thing that really changed, I don't think it's necessarily God's breath that changed, it's humanity and the environment that have changed because of wickedness, and now you're not able to abide God's presence, and it becomes oppressive. And so that's what's being described, I think. And as it becomes more dried out, you could say, then the protective bubble becomes brittle. When things get so dried out, they are easier to break, right? And so I think that's what's being described, and the protective bubble is going to shatter and or crack open, and because violence is filling the earth instead of God's breath filling the earth, and the waters are going to come pouring from down above, and then also says that they burst up from the fountains beneath. And so it's basically, the bubble collapses and the world is destroyed. The flood, everything returns to chaos. So I do think it's trying to depict a worldwide event, but I don't know that if it's trying to depict it literally or just symbolically, to say, hey, when you act this way, you undermine the world, you turn it upside down, you turn it into chaos. It could be that, right? So it's trying to teach you a way of looking at the world that helps you understand the consequences of sin. At the very least, it's doing that. Like, no matter what, whether the whole earth was covered with water or not. That is definitely what the writers are trying to do with the story of the flood, is teach that principle. And then there's an open question of whether they also meant it literally. They definitely meant the symbolism. And that's a point I want to make, is like the symbolism is always there no matter what, whether it's also literal or not. And I was in a conversation with Justin Owens the other day, and he said something I really like, because Joseph Smith said it too. It's like the gospel is usually like a both and or a yes and I kind of feel that way too. I tend to lean towards it's both symbolic and literal most of the time, but every now and then I'm like, I don't know, maybe it wasn't literal this time. I just don't let that bother me at the end of the day, because it's not worth it, you know. It's much more worth it to just stick with the stuff, you know, like put the questions that bother you to the side for a little bit and keep pressing forward in faith. And eventually those questions get answered, or you're able to deal with the ambiguity better. You know, your capacity for dealing with those things increases. All right, so that's what's happening. And what the other thing that's happening is that because the world is collapsing, at the same time that it's collapsing, God is going to basically recreate the world in a miniature form in the ark, and he's going to protect Noah and his family and at least some of the animals, right? And put them in the ark. And so the ark is like a miniature world that's being built, or like a temple. But see, we shouldn't think of that as two opposite things, because the world was, if you went to my Creation Fireside stories, you know, the stories I told was that the creation is parallel to the creation of the temple. So the creation of the world is like the creation of the temple later in the scriptures. The world is God's temple, and, you know, the elements are the tabernacle or temple of God, as D&C 93 says. So it's the same thing. Like it's, you know, what's happening on a small scale is what's happening on a big scale. So the world's collapsing, God's making a new world, basically a new temple that he's going to put Noah and his family in. And in fact, it's beautiful. In Genesis 7:16, it does say the Lord, you know, shut the door behind them. It's like they got into the ark and they couldn't close the door themselves, so the Lord does it for them. It's kind of this beautiful little touch on the story that shows like God, you know, was there with Noah and his family. In fact, it says Noah walked with God and Enoch walked with God. Walking with God is a theme in the Old Testament. God wanted to walk with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He came, you know, to walk with him in the cool of the day, the cool of the breeze. And instead they ran away from him, right? And so that God always wants to walk with us, and throughout the scriptures there are people that do. He, you know, Enoch and Abraham, Noah and Abraham later, God asks him to walk with him. And then with the Israelites, when he tabernacles with them, he does it so that he can walk with them. So anyway, Noah walks with God, and God, like, you know, shuts him into the ark. And there's a great scripture that says God made a covenant with Noah, and so therefore he put him in the ark. So you see, I said during my firesides that creation is covenantal, and that this scripture supports that idea, that because God is making a new world, the ark is a new little world on a smaller scale, and it's going to work against the waters of chaos. It's going to protect Noah against the waters of chaos because of the covenant that's been made between them. So as long as Noah has that relationship with God, like that he walks with God, then there will be a protective bubble around Noah, whether it's the firmament above or the ark around him. That protective bubble will shield him from the waters of chaos, and will make God's presence not oppressive, but a boon of life to him. All right, so when the water pours down for 40 days, and I just want to point out again, like, maybe it really was 40 days, but 40 is a number that's used all the time to describe transition periods. So like the rain comes down out of heaven for 40 days. Moses goes up on the mountain for 40 days. The children of Israel wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus goes out to fast for 40 days. Elijah went out to fast for 40 days. Like, that's not by coincidence that they're using 40 over and over and over again. And so whether it's literally 40 days or 40 years or whatever the time measure unit is. I don't know that it matters as much as that it's like a symbolic way of saying this is a transition period. Like, things are going to change in this time period. Jesus, when he goes out to fast, then he comes back and then he begins his ministry. Moses goes up on the mountain, he comes back and he brings the 10 commandments and the Mosaic law. Like, there's a transition, there's a change from a previous state to a new state. Elijah fasts for 40 days and he has a change. And the earth, it rains for 40 days with Noah, and the earth, goes from being corrupt with violence to like collapsing in on itself to becoming new again, kind of thing. So that's important to think about. And then the waters were on the earth for 5 months, 150 days, and 5 months is the number 5 in Hebrew symbology is like a period of grace. So it's like, God's grace washing things clean again. And there are 7 the story is a little confusing because it says bring animals 2 by 2, and then it says no, but actually bring 7 clean animals and 2 of the unclean animals. Well, that shows you that there's some editing going on. I mentioned this before, that there are editors to this story, and the idea of clean and unclean animals doesn't come up yet at the time of Noah. Like, that's a law of Moses thing, which is later than Noah. So the fact that that means there's some editor from after the law of Moses, from after the concept of clean and unclean animals being introduced, who's writing that into the story, okay? And so that tells you something, that like this story has been tampered with, you could say, but it may not be a bad tampering. In some instances, plain and precious things are taken away. In other instances, it's not necessarily bad. And as I mentioned yesterday, this is probably in the Babylonian era is when these final editors, Babylonian exile era, when these final editors are putting this story together. And so they probably have a story in mind. And scholars have tried to identify what it is. And I think I agree with them that the idea is that the children of Israel in the Babylonian exile would probably, as I mentioned a couple videos ago, would be asking the question of like, has God forsaken them? He made this covenant with them and promised that they would be protected, basically. They'd be special, that there would be a little bubble around the land of Israel, and that their enemies wouldn't be able to, prevail over them. And so if and then they ended up in exile anyway. And so the story of Noah would be a powerful story for those people in the exile, because it would show that here God's done this before. God has allowed the world to be destroyed, but he saved a remnant. There was a remnant he saved in an ark, and so his covenant was held true. Like, he didn't break his covenant. He just reestablished it with Noah and his family, and he's going to do it again in the Babylonian exile. There will be a remnant, as Isaiah talks about, or Jeremiah, that will come out of the exile, and God will reestablish his covenant with them, and like the promises will go on. They will go forward, right? So these editors are probably including things like clean and unclean because they're trying to say something about, so just keep your covenant, like keep the law of Moses, don't give up on it. And because God won't give up on you. He's going to bring you out of the exile, or he's going to reestablish the world. Because if you get taken into exile, your world has collapsed on you. I mean, it is the same thing as having the flood destroy the world, right? Your whole life is shattered. And so the story of Noah probably resonates with you really well in this context I'm trying to outline. And it's early for me. I've had a lot of late nights doing work and stuff, and so I'm really tired, and my brain doesn't feel as sharp, so hopefully this is coming across well. But so that's one other thing I wanted to point out. And then the ark itself has 3 layers. It's like heaven, earth, the underworld, or the 3 degrees of glory, some people will say. It's just interesting. There are 3 levels to it. And then it's covered with pitch. And the word for pitch, it shares the same root word as atonement. And so it's like if you were to build this ark with wooden beams and everything, there'd still be cracks that the water could get through. But if you have covered in pitch, or if you cover it in atonement, then the waters will stay out. It'll seal you against the chaos. So there's some kind of cool atonement symbolism in there. And then the other thing about the ark was that there's a window that God wants him to make. And the word for window, it's sohar, which is, there's a story. It may not mean window. It could be like a stone. And there's actually a rabbinic legend. It's in our footnote in the LDS King James version of this story. If you look at the footnote for window, it says there's like a rabbinic legend that what happened actually was that God gave Noah a shining stone to use in the ark to light it up, like the Jaredite story. So when the brother Jared, if this rabbinic legend is true, it could suggest that that's where the brother Jared got the idea from. Like, why would he think of God touching stones to light them up unless maybe he had heard it before, like that God had given Noah a stone to light up his barge, his ark, so that's kind of cool. But in any event, it's the light that shines in darkness. So you see God's recreating the world, and they're going to be inside this like bubble of darkness. And so God is going to put in the firmament would be like, the sun, moon, and stars were in the firmament in the original creation, and now he's going to put a window in the ark, which is like the firmament, the hard covering that protects Noah. But he's going to put a light, some source of light in that firmament, so that he can be, they're not in the dark all the time. So it's kind of cool. Like, you can see the parallels with the creation story. You can see the parallels with like Christ and his atonement, because Christ is the pitch that seals you off from all the chaos, but also is the light that shines in your life. And this is all because God made a covenant with Noah, right? Because Noah is in a relationship with God. He walks with God. And that's what it means to be in covenant, right? Is to be in a relationship, to have a bond with him, to walk with him. It's real, it's living. It's not just, I keep this checklist of commandments. It's God is a real being, a real person, and you communicate with him, and you respond to him, and you share with him your thoughts and feelings, and you go to him with what you need, and that's walking with God. It's real. It's a real relationship, right? And because of that, Noah and his family get to be in this little bubble ark. So, all right. So the world is made again. I want you guys, I'm trying to show you like how to think of this typologically or symbolically, or like the microcosm is the macrocosm, and the macrocosm is the microcosm. What's happening on a big scale is happening on a little scale. What's happening at the creation level is happening at the ark level, and vice versa. So the creation is covenantal, you could say. You can reverse it. You can say, well, if the ark was covenantal, then the original ark, this little bubble called Earth that we live in, that's floating among the cosmic chaos waters, is also covenantal. And that's actually why the flood happened, was because humanity was breaking its covenant with God and creation by being violent, and corrupting their way on the earth. Okay, so one more thing or another thing is, before Noah gets in the ark, God explains that humanity's thoughts were just evil continually. Like the thoughts of their imagination were evil continually. And when God, at the end of when the flood recedes and Noah and his family come out, Noah offers a sacrifice, and it says that the sweet aroma rose up to God, and when he smelled it, he's like, okay, I'm never gonna, it's when he smells it, is the way Genesis 9 or 8 puts it. God smells this aroma, and he decides in that moment, he decides within himself, is I think the words in Genesis, that he will no longer destroy the earth with a flood. And so what I was trying to say with this, sorry, Avery walked by and I got distracted. The God's never going to destroy the earth again with a flood. And so there's this idea that like Noah's sacrifice, and he says even though the man's thoughts, imagination, the thoughts of his imagination are evil continually. So like the flood in the story, there's like this, the conflict is the violence and corruption of the earth, and the evil thoughts of man and everything is causing the conflict, and then God is going to destroy the world, and that's supposed to resolve it, right? But what happens is that actually it doesn't resolve it. Man is still evil. Like his thoughts, the natural man is still an enemy to God. his thoughts are evil continually. And so the story, it's kind of like, well, then what was the point of that whole flood? Like, it didn't work. It didn't resolve anything, right? It just, it that you could say that. And many scholars have pointed this out when they comment on this story, is like, this, it's so crazy. Like, it doesn't actually work. But what works, what happens is, because of Noah's sacrifice, God decides he's not going to destroy the earth again with a flood. He's actually going to offer more grace and forgiveness to mankind. Even though man continues to be evil. And in fact, in the very next story, Noah is described as being in the image of God. He's the new Adam. And then he plants a vineyard, which is like a new Garden of Eden. And then there's that whole crazy story about him in the tent with Ham and everything. And I can explain that a little bit more. But anyway, the point is like, right away, you start having like this drama again between like brothers and what's happening. And they're, like, evil again arises, right? And like almost instantaneously after the flood, it's like exactly what God said, is that the man's thoughts continue to be a problem. They're always evil. But the reason why we aren't going to be destroyed again is because of this sacrifice. Okay. See, it's this, and it's not just the death of the animal. I've pointed this out in my firesides. The death of the animal isn't what changes things. It's the smoke, the fire. The animals get burned on the altar, and the smoke rises up, and there's a sweet aroma. And that word for aroma is the same word as breath or wind. It's ruach. Okay, so there's a spirit that is being generated by this sacrifice. And the sweet aroma, the word for sweet, is the same root word as Noah's name, rest. Like, so it's like the sacrifice is creating a new atmosphere. Like, if you went to the law of Moses, if you were at the tabernacle and they were burning animals all day, there's just be like a smell in the air, right? And I'm not saying it would be a good smell or anything. I'm just saying there'd be a smell in the air. And there's an atmosphere around the tabernacle or the temple because of all the sacrifices. And that atmosphere, that sweet aroma, is a new breath of God, you could say, that has filled the world. Because remember, the problem before was violence had shut people off from the presence of God, had removed the breath of God from their life. And so God, in order to like protect them and help them, and so they aren't destroyed by their own wickedness, even though they continue to be evil even after the flood, he is going to solve it with a different way, which is through this sacrifice. So I'm interpreting this explicitly as a symbol of Jesus Christ, right? That through Christ and his atonement, a new atmosphere, a new breath of God will be blown into the world, and it'll be a sweet aroma that changes everything. And it'll fill up. Like, if the world collapsed, then there needs to be new breath to, like, for lack of a better word, pump it back up. Like I told you, my first, I think I told you guys this, my first college professor on the Old Testament said the ancients thought of the world like it looked like a football, right? With like a jaredite barge, which is like a football. So if it's collapsed on itself, you got to pump it back up, like, and that's what's happening with the sacrifice. Is it's blowing the breath of God back into the universe or into the cosmos, and making it and creating a new bubble in which we can live. But it has to come from within the system instead of from outside, because mankind isn't good enough to connect with God from the outside anymore. Like, the thoughts of his heart and his imagination are only evil continually. And so God comes down to our level, at the sacrificial level, and breathes it into us, a breath of life there. So what I'm getting at is that, I've always told you this, the atonement is like cosmic. It made a new world, like from within it. Jesus came from without the world. He came within it. He condescended into our world and became the Lamb of God. And he baptizes with fire, and he's creating a new smoke that goes out, a new atmosphere, a new breath that fills up a new world in which you and I can live, while we're trying to figure out our wickedness, and while we're trying to figure out how to get better. And that's the thing, is the atonement is like creation. It's creating a new world. It's the process of creation was to breathe breath into the chaos waters, and the chaos waters reflect back to him, reflect back to God what he was breathing into it. And the sacrifice there that Noah's making is new breath coming up from the altar into the chaos waters that are now all around him or whatever, and making a new world with it. And that world is going to reflect back to him the grace and the mercy that is being shown in that sacrifice. Okay? And so it's a new world. I don't know how to say it better. And it's a symbol of Jesus Christ and the atonement. So that actually, I think, is what the story of Noah is all about. It's a type and shadow of Jesus Christ. He's the ark. He's the sacrifice. Our violence leads to the world collapsing on itself. And not necessarily because God is a bad guy, but because God's justice is rooted in his love. And, at some point, if you're super violent, you got to prevent the violence, right? If you're God. And about that violence, it's about brothers. The secret combinations are about brothers taking stuff from brothers, that whole firstborn concept. Actually, I'll save this for another video because I've been going on for a while. So I'll talk in my next video about Ham and the tent of Noah and everything. And I'll get into like the brothers again in that story.